Welcome to Study Loop.
Okay, so this problem, 110, has a lot of parts to it. So this is be a longer video, but bear with. And part A gives us this sort of like big black square, and it says, well, this is our photosynthesis. Okay, and then it asks us, well, how do the rates of respiration uh, compare with this and the rates of growth? Okay, so respiration rate should be less than the rate of photosynthesis, right? So that's going to be our respiration. And the thing is, respiration, some of it goes towards like metabolism, but then another portion of it, a portion of the respiration goes to growth. And the point of this is not to have the precise portions exactly correct, as that's going to vary depending on some external factors, which we'll see in later parts, but just sort of knowing how they're nested, right? So this was part A, and then we can kind of move on then to part B here. And B gives us this nice graph uh, on how these respiration rates vary with temperature. And it says, okay, so we're in a forest whose typical temperature is 25, okay? And so that puts us sort of in this portion of the graph. This is where we're at. And then it says, well, the temperature has increased 3 to 5 degrees. That sort of moves us to this next data point. So that's where our focus is. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of those lines so we don't sort of put too much on that graph and make it hard to read. And then what it asks us is, well, what would you expect to happen in that increase of temperature? Well, if we look at what happens between those data points, we see that the respiration increases and the photosynthesis rate decreases. So maybe that's what I would expect to happen if the temperature goes up by 5 degrees. And so that's sort of what B is getting on. Okay, but then it goes on to tell us, well, it turns out that when the temperature increases, so instead of the photosynthesis decreasing and the respiration rate increasing, you'll see that this whole arc that sort of peaks above our like ideal temperature will move to the right, and so instead it would peak above our new temperature, right? However, the respiration rate does not do the same thing. So the respiration rate is just kind of going to stay where it is for that increased temperature. And so this is called acclimation. And so part C wants us to pose a couple of questions. And there's no right answer then to this. This is sort of just it's just thinking scientifically. And so if then the photosynthesis rate, so if our photosynthesis rate is able to stay at its sort of max, but the peak, but the respiration rate has increased from where it was before, the difference between the photosynthesis rate and the respiration rate is now higher, right? So that means this difference between our max up here and the photosynthesis rate is higher than it was here. Okay, and so that means we're respiring more. And so I would ask, why doesn't the plant dry out? Okay, because we lose water during respiration. So then the question is it uh, an environmental or regional thing, right? So we're talking about a deciduous forest, which has enough water to sustain deciduous trees. So is it a regional thing? Does this occur in other areas, like the desert, uh, or is there an adaptation that's happening? Is the stomata doing something? is there an evolutionary factor? So is there an adaptation of some sort? So those would sort of be my questions. And like I said, there's not a right answer to that one. Okay, so that was part C. So we're cruising along here. In part D, we have another little graph to look at. And so this one gives us some data for a response rate to photosynthesis and respiration due to an initial change in temperature on the short term. And then it asks us, okay, so then it's asking us to sort of draw in this box here what the rest of that graph might be. I'll just blow it up to make the drawing easier and clearer. Okay, and so we see that they got a increase in temperature. Okay, and initially the photosynthesis rate sort of went up. It was stimulated the same way that maybe it stimulates when there's sunshine, a slight increase in temperature. But over time, here, it sort of decreased, right? And same with the respiration. And respiration initially goes up and eventually decreases. And so there's this little area here in the center where our respiration rate is higher than our photosynthesis rate. And that sort of happens, if you recall, in the previous slide where we had that sort of decrease in photosynthesis and that increase in respiration. But then they sort of find some, they do this temperature acclimation, right? So they find a new sort of state. If you recall from the previous slide, well, that state occurs, right? The photosynthesis is able to get back to its optimal sort of peak, right? So it would be kind of where it started, but the respiration should then now be a little bit higher than it was before. Okay, and so what we're going to see is this new sort of stability, and if we assume then that the temperature doesn't change again, that our photosynthesis will get back to its appropriate peak. Okay, and then that the rate of respiration, so the difference between these two should be shorter than they were before. Okay, so we want this gap to be smaller than that one. Okay, and then as we move along here, we analyze the long-term effect of rate of respiration that exceeds the rate of photosynthesis, right? So this is saying, well, what if this didn't happen? What if instead, okay, we had it where if we had a new box, instead of them switching back, we see that the rate of photosynthesis is now below the rate of respiration. And then what happens? Okay. So in this case, if you recall, our photosynthesis, right, is supposed to bring in, so the process of photosynthesis is to sort of bring in the light energy and produce our sugars, okay? And respiration is this gas exchange, so that brings in our carbon dioxide and exchanges it for oxygen, okay? But the respiration needs energy. It needs this energy provided by photosynthesis. Okay, so if we have respiration happening at a higher rate than our photosynthesis, eventually we're not going to be able to respire anymore. Okay, and so that was sort of the last portion here of part E. So